Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast all things college golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. I have a little something different for you this week. Since we are playing the Big 12 Championship at famed Southern Hills in Tulsa this week, I'd like to do an episode where I kind of go back and talk about my best memories of Southern Hills growing up in Oklahoma and having played there, competed there, coached there, having absolutely watched a bunch of major championship golf there. It's an unbelievable venue. If you've never seen Southern Hills, you need to find your way to the next time they host a major, which I think will be in about another 6 or 7 years. So I want to give these memories of my times that I cherish back at Southern Hills. To begin with, I need to say a little bit about its designer, Perry Maxwell. Perry Duke Maxwell was one of the great golf course designers of all times. He actually worked with Alistair McKenzie on several projects, but his courses that I love the most, one I grew up on, the Ponca City Country Club. He did a redesign of that. Twin Hills in Oklahoma City, which hosted a PGA Championship in the 1930s. Colonial in Fort Worth, Cherry Hills in Denver, and obviously Southern Hills in Tulsa. So he's had some of the most amazing venues that have hosted multiple major championships. And he was literally part of hundreds of co-design or renovated projects. He's one of the most prolific golf course designers of the 20th century. So his golf courses are favorites of mine. And my first memory of Southern Hills actually isn't a memory of mine at all. It was my dad told me this story growing up. He was a young man who grew up in Abilene, Texas. And if you've listened to my podcast for a while, you know some of the stories about my dad. But one of the stories that I haven't told was he was an assistant pro at Southern Hills in 1953 and 54. He would then go on to be an assistant pro for Mike Murrah at Wichita Country Club in Wichita, Kansas, before finally becoming the head golf professional at the Ponca City Country Club where I grew up. But he worked for a legendary club pro at Southern Hills named Bill Wotherspoon. Bill was a longtime club professional, and obviously at an elite golf course like Southern Hills, you're going to be very well respected. He had a caddy master. In those days, pretty much every club had a caddy master because there weren't golf carts available. So they had caddies all the time. And Virgil, I believe, was there for, a lot of years. And by the time he was still working there at Southern Hills 50 years later when I came there for the Big 12 Championship in 2003. He wasn't a caddy master at that time. I think he worked in the golf shop. But my dad always told me stories about Bill Wotherspoon and Virgil Nunnally. But one of the stories that stands out that my dad told me about Southern Hills and his time there was, in those days, club professionals and their assistants, one of their jobs was to actually play with the members. So, one day a week, your afternoon work might be actually going out and joining one of the groups. And so this particular day, my dad joined a group about 1 o'clock. And this group was notorious for playing for quite a lot of money. And my dad didn't have a lot of money. He and my mom had just had 2 children and would literally have a third in another year or so. He wasn't making very much money working as an assistant golf pro in 1953, 54. So he wasn't interested in getting in a big money game for sure, and certainly not with the members. But they talked him into it. And he told a story which he didn't tell my mom for about 15 years because I think she would have had a heart attack. He was standing on the 18th tee at Southern Hills, one of the most demanding uphill dogleg left to rights with one of the most severe greens you've ever seen. And usually second shot facing a very, very strong south wind. But he stood on that tee box, and if he didn't make a birdie, he was going to lose $50. He had to win the hole or he was going to lose $50. And $50 in that 1954 money, I don't know how much it would be today, but it was a fortune, and he did not have the money. He certainly didn't have it in his pocket. Might have had to go empty the savings account to pay off this bet. But he talks about hitting a drive down the middle of the fairway, and it was into a strong south wind. He had a 3-wood off a hanging lie and hit that 3-wood in there about 15 feet and buried the putt to keep from losing $50. And he said, I kept that to myself for a long time before I ever told my mom he would not do it. It was just pretty devastating. But So my dad, who was a really good player in his own right, had played in the U.S. Open, and he was a nice player. But to have birdied the 18th hole at Southern Hills in those conditions, under that pressure, to keep from losing $50, may be the best birdie of his life. So my first memory personally of Southern Hills came from the 1970 PGA Championship. That year, Dave Stockton won his first of 2 PGA Championships. Arnold Palmer was runner-up to Dave, and that was the third time he was runner-up, and actually the last time he was runner-up in any of the 4 major championships. He played well in the U.S. Open for several more years after that, but this was the last time he really challenged to win the PGA Championship, the only one of the 4 majors that he had never won. And so he was runner-up that week. But my memories are sort of more personal than just the results of the tournament. My future brother-in-law, who would go on to marry my twin sister, Patty, Chuck Coatney, was in high school at the time, and he decided he would love to caddy in the tournament. And he was fortunate enough to get the 1969 Masters champion, George Archer. So he got to carry Archer's bag that week. And most people don't know this. In those days, very few players had their own caddy. They were designated caddy. I think Jack Nicklaus was one of the first who continued to take the same caddy. Angelo Argia was his caddy. And I think Lee Trevino had a long-time caddy. Gary Player had one. But not very many players had a caddy. Even the defending Masters champion from 1969 didn't have one. So Chuck got it. Interesting fact about George. 2 facts. One, he was the tallest major champion ever and still is that today, 6'6". And he's no longer alive. He passed away several years ago. But George was illiterate. He could not read or write. And it was something he really never talked about. But and I don't think Chuck, my future brother-in-law, knew it at the time. But very, very humble man, great player, played well into his 60s on the Champions Tour, was a great player. But Chuck got to caddy for him that week. And so my dad, who was a club professional, was going to be a rules official during the week. And so he had several different sessions that he had to be over there for. And the first one was the afternoon session of the first day on Thursday. Back up a little bit, Chuck was caddying the practice rounds with George. And when George was finished on Wednesday with his last practice round, Chuck thought, well, I'll just go down to the driving range and see who's practicing. Interestingly enough, William Ben Hogan was on that practice tee. He was set to play in the tournament the next day, and Chuck said he got to watch him for 2 hours. And he didn't know it at the time, but Hogan would withdraw from the tournament prior to its start the next day because a shoulder injury just wasn't good enough. He just didn't feel like he could do it. But Chuck told me that night, he called over and said, hey, when you get here tomorrow, you're going to see Ben Hogan. He's hitting it great. And I was so excited to see my childhood hero because I'd never seen Ben Hogan in person. And I'd only been playing golf about a year or so at that time. And I was really excited, only to be dismayed to find out the next day that Hogan had withdrawn. So I do remember walking with my dad through the gate that was about number 7 tee box. And we walked up the left side of the fairway and got up to number 8. He was just kind of showing me where he was going to be. He was going to be on 7 or 8. I can't remember which one. And he was going to let me just walk by myself, and then I would meet him in that same spot we dropped off later, which, 1970, you wouldn't think it was a problem to drop your child off and just let him go. But my dad had no reservation with that at all. I was to meet him later. But I do remember watching Kermit Zarley, who was a former Houston All-American and won several times on the PGA Tour. He buried his tee shot into the right bunker on number 8. Par 3, long hole, usually a 2-iron at the least, and a lot of times a 3 wood. It took him 3 to get out of that bunker, and he made a triple. So the very first professional I ever saw in person was a really good player, and he took 3 times to get out of the bunker, triple bogey. That was odd. And so I walked over to 9T, and there was a wait for some reason on 9. I think there was a ruling, and Lee Trevino was on the tee, and he was obviously one of the best players in the world at the time. So I thought I'd wait and see Lee hit that tee shot. And he hit a beautiful butter cut down the left side and probably left him with a 9-iron or wedge to the green. But instead of following him up 9 fairway, I cut over to 2T right behind number 1 green. And I looked up at the top of the hill, and there was this throng, literally it looked like thousands and thousands of fans packed around the first tee, walking down the fairway and lining up behind number one green. So I got a pretty good position there, and sure enough, it was Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer paired together in the first round. And this throng of literally thousands. So I didn't move from that spot. I was going to wait. I couldn't see the green. I was kind of in the walkway between one green and 2T. And I thought, when they come by here, yeah, I'm just going to grab one of their shirts and just see if some of that magic would be transformed to my golf game. But they both passed by very quickly. But I remember thinking they were bigger than giants. They were just so big. And obviously they weren't huge men. But anyway, first time I ever saw Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer in person. It's kind of a fun time to see that. So that I don't remember much else from that week. I spent the rest of the day watching golf. Couldn't get really near Jack or Arnie after that because there was just so many people. It was sort of like trying to follow Tiger in 2005 or 6. You just couldn't get near him. Yep, Dave Stockton won that week. Arnie was runner-up. And my future brother-in-law got to caddy for George Archer. So I thought that was a pretty good week. It inspired me greatly to have seen those professionals in person like it would any kid. You know, you see pro golf. I mean, like Rory McIlroy, when he saw Tiger in person, he thought that was great and eventually became a great player himself. I didn't become that player, but I did get to go back to Southern Hills to finally play it 3 years later. Young friend of mine that played junior golf against me named Bill Warren Jr., his dad and his grandfather, they were big-time golf people in Oklahoma. In fact, I believe his dad built the Warren course at Notre Dame. His dad was a Notre Dame graduate. But Bill Jr., we had played together the final round of the Perry Jr. About 2 months earlier, and he called me and said, "Do you want to play in the Southern Hills Junior 4-ball?" I don't know if they had one before that year, and I don't know if they ever had one after. But I said, "Sure, I'll do that if I get to go play Southern Hills." And I can't, as good a memory as I have, I can't remember how we played, where we finished. I know we didn't win, but I remember thinking to myself, this place is so special. It is unbelievable. And I got an opportunity, obviously, to play a course that I loved greatly, but would literally have a lifelong love affair with. And that's why this week, getting to go back to Southern Hills is very special for me. My next experience at Southern Hills, though, was the 1977 U.S. Open. And I thought, I'm going to caddy in this. You know, I watched the 1970 PGA. I don't want to just watch the 77 U.S. Open. I want to get in the trenches. So I signed up. We had to do 2 training sessions, I think one in April and one in May. So we'd come over on a Saturday and they would train us. Again, you would think, well, they wouldn't have to train a bunch of people because most players have their own caddy, but that wasn't true. They had to have a big army of caddies in line. And as players would show up without caddies, they would get them. So the first day could be over, there was Sunday morning, and I got up really early, drove over, and was 4th in line. And so, I mean, I was there, I know, by 6 o'clock, and there were 3 guys ahead of me. And my buddy, Jimmy Nickel from Enid, he was going to do the same thing, and I think he was 1 or 2 people behind me in the line. So what would happen, in the caddy shack that we had in those days was down the hill on the drive entrance. It's now on what would be the last green of the par 3 or the 9-hole course that Ben Crenshaw designed there. So anyway, that's where we were. And they would radio down from the golf shop, "Hey, Joe Blow is here. He needs a caddy." And so the next caddy in line would walk up to the golf shop, meet his player, and there you'd have it. And I remember thinking the third person that came in needing a caddy was Tommy Bolt. Now, Tommy Bolt was given a special exemption to play this particular U.S. Open. His career was long since finished as far as the PGA Tour. But he had won there in 1958. He had won the 1958 U.S. Open. So the USGA gave him, and they gave, along with Sam Snead and Julius Boros. Julius Boros had won the U.S. Open in 1952 in Dallas, and he had won the 1963 U.S. Open at Brookline. He had one of the great U.S. Open records of all times. I told you Tommy Bolt had won in 58 at Southern Hills, but Sam Snead got the exemption, and I think the USGA was hoping by some miracle, Sam could figure out a way to win because he had never won the U.S. Open. 4 times Sam was runner-up in the U.S. Open. Heartbreaking losses. He once wrote in a book, he said, if I had shot 69 the final round of every U.S. Open, I would have won 12 U.S. Opens. But he never could shoot that score, tough score on some of those years. But here he was. So those are the 3 that got this sponsor exemption or the USGA special exemption to play that year. The very first one they ever gave, I believe, was 1966 at Olympic, and they gave it to Ben Hogan, who was finally out of exemptions to be able to play or couldn't. I mean, in those days, though, most people don't understand, some of the best players in the world had to go through a 36-hole qualifier. I mean, it wasn't a given that you were going to play in these events. And I'm not sure exactly how Hogan got in all those events, but eventually by 1966, he had no status to do that. They gave him the exemption. He played well enough that year at Olympic to be able to come back and play the following year at Baltusrol. But anyway, these 3 in 1977, Julius Boros, Sam Snead, Tommy Bolt, would all go on that week to shoot. Sam Snead shot 74-78, Tommy Bolt 75-78, Julius Boros 77-76. So they all 3 missed the cut by several shots. Now, so I'm number 4 in line, and I know the next person that comes into the golf shop and they radio down, that's going to be the guy I'm caddying for that week. And so Jimmy, my buddy, is sitting there next to me, and they radio down, okay, we have another player in the golf shop. Send caddy number 4 up here to meet David Strawn. And Jimmy said, who's that? And I said, well, David Strawn was runner-up to Craig Stadler in the 1973 U.S. Amateur at Inverness, and he won the Sonny Hanna Amateur the next year. He's a great player from North Carolina. And Jimmy looked at me like, are you kidding? And that, unfortunately, I do have a pretty good reputation for golf history. And so I met David Strawn. I caddied for him on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in practice rounds every day. And then obviously the tournament started on Thursday. But David, I found out that day, was just going to take a cab back and forth from the hotel. And I said, what hotel are you staying at? And he said, whatever the name was. I said, I'm staying there. And I had my car, so I ended up driving. I chauffeured David Strawn back and forth to the hotel every single day. So it was really good because I didn't have to caddy in a far remote location and walk up there. He had his player's badge. So I was able to drive right in with him every day. We parked at the clubhouse. It was really an easy situation for me. He didn't have to get a rental car or pay a cab. And I got to take my player right into the parking lot. It's pretty special week. But David, I remember several things about him. One, he was shocked that I knew his career as well as he did, that I had this little golf trivia brain that I had. But one other thing I noticed that week was he had 3 wedges, and nobody playing golf had 3 wedges in those days. You had a pitching wedge and you had a sand wedge to get out of bunkers, but there were no gap wedges. There was no lob wedges. None of that existed. And he played 3 wedges that week. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's really interesting. And then a few years later, Tom Watson won the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, beat Nicklaus by a couple of shots there with 3 wedges. And then all of a sudden, now the whole world had to have 3 wedges. So let's get back to the practice rounds. I don't have a lot of memories of, I don't have too many memories of the tournament other than David shot 77, 71, birdied the 36th hole, number 18, beautiful 30-footer, but he missed the cut by a shot. I do remember him tying Jerry Pate, the defending champion, who also missed the cut. But David was playing with Joe Inman. Joe had won on the tour in 1976, was a North Carolinian also, and they were friends. And so they were playing one of the practice rounds together. And I remember on the 10th hole, and Joe would go on to coach college golf in Georgia and would become a really good colleague and friend of mine in later years. But he also worked for Ping for many, many years. Joe's just a legendary guy and a great guy and really smart. But at the time he was playing the tour. So David, who was playing in his first U.S. Open, I think he played in a couple before because of the runner-up finish in the U.S. Amateur. But anyway, they were playing together. And on the 10th tee, I remember we were playing a foursome. I don't remember who the other 2 players were, but Tom Kite was playing alone, and we let him go through on the 10th tee, so we had to wait. And I remember up the hill, there's a big hill to the right of 10T. And I can remember there was a little girl in a wheelchair and with her mom, and they were high enough where she could see all the golf, but she couldn't get any further down the hill than they were. And I remember thinking, boy, that's too bad. She's not going to be able to watch golf. She's just going to have to do it from up there. And Joe looked up the hill and saw her. And while we were waiting to tee off, he took a golf ball out of his bag and walked up there with a pen and signed it, gave her a hug. Now, they didn't have cell phones or anything to take a picture or anything, but I remember thinking to myself, this guy's pretty cool. He's playing a practice round for the U.S. Open. The girl is 50 yards up the hill. He saw her, went up there, and probably made a lifetime memory for that young girl. I know it made an impression upon me. You can still be a great player and treat people the right way. And I thought that was wonderful. Another memory was a different day, and I'm not sure which day it was, but we were playing the front nine in a practice round, and there was a big wait on the 8th tee. The 8th tee is a monster par 3. And in the group in front of us was Gary Player and Jack Nicklaus. And we were going to have to wait and watch them play. So I thought, this is unbelievable. Here I am. Now I get to see them literally hit shots off this. And so everybody was there was a bench there and they were sitting there, but I went over to get something to drink. On another bench was a big tub of Gatorade, and another was water. So a big jug of water, big jug of Gatorade. And so I went over there and I'm trying to get, and the Gatorade is empty. It doesn't have any at all. And I'm trying to get that. And Gary Player walks over. He doesn't know me. I certainly have never met Gary Player. And he looks at me and he says, "Son, you need to drink the water. Water is much better than Gatorade. Drink the water." And so I went immediately and changed and I got a cup full of water, fresh water, took a drink, and I said, "Thank you very much." I know he would never remember that, but it made an impression upon me. And I think I've only had Gatorade out of necessity through the years. I've always drank water. And every time I drink a Gatorade, I think to myself, poor Gary Player would be so upset with me right now for drinking this Gatorade instead of the water. But another good memory. I do remember Jack hitting a 3-wood and kind of got it up in the wind a little bit, and it kind of got eaten up by the wind and finished short and right of the bunker. And Gary took out this 2-iron and hit this little low draw that hit about 20 yards short of the green and rolled right onto the front edge. And I kept on thinking to myself, Jack Nicklaus is the greatest player in the game. He just hit this kind of not so good 3-wood up there short of the green. And Gary Player just hit this little low draw, and there he's got a birdie putt. Don't remember exactly how either played that week. I know that neither had a great finish, but they were still some of the best players in the game. Another memory I have of that week was meeting Marty Fleckman. Now, Marty was at the very tail end of his career. In fact, he did not play well that week at Southern Hills. I think he opened with a very high number and maybe didn't play the second round. But he was staying at the same hotel where David Strawn and I were staying. And I remember he was walking toward me and was over near the pool. And I stopped and I said, "Mr. Fleckman." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "My name is Mike McGraw. I'm caddy, and I just wanted you to know I've always followed your career." And he said, "Thank you." Now, for those of you who don't know who Marty Fleckman is, he was one of the greatest college players of all time. He's played at the University of Houston, played on national championship teams. Really, really good player. But he also led the 1967 U.S. Open at Baltusrol after 3 rounds as an amateur. He shot 80 the final round. Nicklaus would go on to win, Arnold Palmer runner-up. But that's the kind of golf trivia brain I had. Here's this guy named Marty Fleckman who's literally toward the end of his career, and he didn't play well that week. And I got to meet him, and I thought that was such just a really awesome memory for me. A couple other memories of the 1977 U.S. Open. I believe the very week before that was when Al Geiberger shot the first 59 in the history of the PGA Tour at Memphis. So everybody was still abuzz from that round. Like, how did that happen? Nobody ever thought anybody could shoot in the 50s. It's a great round of golf. I don't remember getting to watch Al Geiberger that week. I do remember people talking a lot about his great score. Interestingly enough, I don't think he shot in the 60s that week. I think he shot 59 and everything else was between 70 and 71 or 2. So to win a golf tournament without shooting in the 60s, And to actually shoot in a 50 is pretty amazing. I'll have to check that. That's just, by the way, every bit of this is from memory. So you're going to have to just trust me. I may get a few of the facts wrong as I have gotten into my senior years here. Another memory I have from the practice round, my brother-in-law, Chuck, who was still not my brother-in-law, my future brother-in-law, he qualified for that U.S. Open at Southern Hills. And he was able to play a practice round with George Archer, whom he had caddied for 7 years earlier in the PGA. So here's Chuck getting to play with somebody that and he said that George was an absolute prince, super nice guy to him, all that. But anyway, George and Chuck got to play an actual match between Sam Snead and a club professional named Jim King. And I don't know much about Jim King other than he was a huge, strong man with gigantic forearms. And his claim to fame, I think at that time, was that he stuffed Jack Tuthill into a locker one time, got upset with him about a ruling or something. I'm not sure what that was. But Chuck's now getting to play with George Archer, a former Masters champion, whom he'd caddied for 7 years earlier, and Sam Snead, one of the all-time legends. And so it was a fun match for him, obviously. And Chuck and George, actually, they won $20. And Chuck texted me this when I was getting ready for this podcast. He says, yes, I watched Hogan hit balls, and he withdrew before the tournament started. And George Archer and I played Jim King and Sam Snead. I don't remember if it was $10 or $20, but I think it was $20. Archer, after the round, said to Snead, hey, King paid me, so you owe Chuck. And Snead just had a grin on his face and never paid Chuck the $20. So Chuck told me all that time, all I would have had to do is just take that $20 bill. I never would have spent it. I would have asked him to sign it and I would have framed it, but it never happened. So all we have now is a memory from my brother-in-law, Chuck. So on Saturday, my player, David Strawn, had missed the cut, and he told me to meet him behind the first tee at about 1 or so on Saturday. And so I got there, and there was a throng of people there to follow Jack Nicklaus. And he was not leading or anything, but still a lot of people to watch him. So I knew I wasn't even going to get close enough to the first tee to see him hit the shot. But I did notice his wife, Barbara Nicklaus, standing kind of up near the golf shop. She was probably 25, 30 yards from the first tee. And in her arms was their young son, Gary, who would go on to actually have a PGA Tour card. The last year Jack Nicklaus played a full schedule on the PGA Tour was 2000. And that was the year that Gary had his tour card. So they got to play practice rounds. They played several tournaments together. But there's Gary. I don't know how old he was. He probably would have been about 8. And I had one of those periscopes that they used to give out or sell you at a U.S. Open or a major, where if you weren't tall enough to see over the people in front of you, you could use the periscope and see the action. And on mine, I had Barbara Nicklaus and Gary sign it. And he was an 8-year-old boy signing an autograph. And I spent maybe 5 minutes talking to Barbara. Sweet lady, wonderful lady. I think all the good things that have been said and written about her through the years are true. She was a great, great mother, family woman, great wife to a superstar golfer, but she was kind to me that day on that Saturday. The final memory I have is Sunday is kind of a little disturbing, actually. And I think a lot of people looking back on it think the same thing. I mean, Hubert Green was leading in the final round and well ahead of Hubert in the deal, a guy named Lou Graham, who'd won the U.S. Open in 1975 at Medina. Lou was making a lot of birdies. I think he birdied 4 or 5 holes on the back nine and ended up posting a 1 under par 279. So Hubert Green parred 10, 11, 12, and 13. He still had a 2-shot lead. And when he putted out for par on 14, 2 USGA officials and a police officer from the Tulsa Police Department came over, kind of pushed him to the side of the green and said, and we're talking to him. And on national television, they had no idea what was going on. But someone had called in a death threat and said that Hubert would be assassinated on the 15th green. Now, the officials gave him the option: you can withdraw from the tournament, we can suspend play, and come back tomorrow, or what do you want to do? And he said, well, I want to play. He said, that's probably, that death threat's probably from some old girlfriend of mine. And the officials laughed, but they thought it was a pretty serious matter. And he ended up actually hitting a poor tee shot on that hole, made par, and his short game just saved him on 15, 16, and 17. On 18, he hit it in the bunker, ended up having to make about a 5-footer for a bogey to win the U.S. Open by one shot. So I have that definite memory. I think that was the first time that I had ever seen, it's the first time I'd seen it in person, but I think it kind of reminded me of what happened in the 1972 Olympic Games when there was, some threats. Well, actually some people were killed, but it's just kind of disturbing that happened. That's the only bad memory I have from the 1977 U.S. Open at Southern Hills. In 1982, the PGA came back to Southern Hills, and I was had just graduated college. I had turned pro a month earlier, I think, at the Kansas Open, made $83. If anybody's wondering about the record of that. And, but I got a job working for television as a spotter behind the ninth green. I'm not really sure exactly what information I was giving them, but I had a radio headset and I stayed there the whole week. And I do have one, indelible memory of I saw all the players come through. So but most of them I really knew who they were and knew a lot about their career. But when Nick Faldo came through, he was a pretty young guy still. He hadn't been playing pro golf for too long, was an up and comer for sure. And I kept on thinking, man, that guy's got a good golf swing. He's a big guy. He'll be a player. So I guess I can spot him. Anyway, the other indelible memory from that week was Ray Floyd made 9 threes in a row, the opening round when he shot 63. He made a par 3 on number 6, a birdie on number 7, a par on number 8, birdie on 9, birdie on 10, par on 11, birdie on 12, I think a birdie on 13 and a par on 14. So holes 6 through 14, 9 straight threes in a major championship. Don't know if it's happened since. I don't think it has. That's just, as I said, all of this is from my memory. But I do remember seeing that and thinking that is amazing. A couple of years later in the 1984 U.S. Open qualifying. Now, so I'm playing. I'm going to be a player at Southern Hills. The entries were so numbered. There was such a large entry that year. They had to have literally 2 full golf courses, Southern Hills and Cedar Ridge across town. So what you did was if you played in the morning at Southern Hills, you'd drive across town and play your afternoon round at Cedar Ridge or vice versa. And I played the morning round at Southern Hills. The wind was blowing maybe 10, 15. So not bad, but it was blowing in the morning. I shot 73. So it was a decent round. Certainly wasn't out of it. Since the field was so large, they were going to take 10 spots to go from this local qualifying to the sectionals. So, I mean, I don't know how many people were in that, but it was the largest, one of the largest local qualifiers in the country. So I thought my 73 was in pretty good shape. We drive across my caddy, whose name was Jay DeGeer. Jay was a 9th grader on the Edmond junior high golf team, would eventually go on to play at Edmond High School. And when I was an assistant coach there, he helped us win a state championship in 1987. But Jay was my caddy that day, and he thought the 73 was a good round. He just assumed if we played well that day, we were going to Winged Foot. He just thought we were going to be at Winged Foot for sure. So we go to the afternoon round at Cedar Ridge, and the wind's blowing 30. And Cedar Ridge, to me, actually is close to as difficult, if not more difficult in the wind than even Southern Hills. More exposed to the wind, really, really firm, fast greens. I shot 79. So I'm really, really upset, thinking this is it. 73, 79, I'm done. And we're driving. There was no cell phones. There was no leaderboard, no internet. So you just literally had to be at Southern Hills where the main headquarters were. And I thought, let's just drive back home to Edmond. And Jay said, no, coach, let's go over to Southern Hills. These scores are going to be higher this afternoon, and you just never know. And so we get over there and we're looking at scores being posted, and sure enough, the scores have skyrocketed. And that my 152 ends up being in a playoff, 10 for 8. And I'm thinking, wow, I've got a chance to go through I'd already made it through the locals in 81. I would go on to make it through the locals in 86 as well. But I thought 152, there's no chance. And so all 10 of us hit on that first tee shot. I pushed mine into the first right bunker over there. Those fairway bunkers are deep and they're no good. And a friend of mine named Joe Merib, Joe hooked it into the left trees, which used to be jail in those days. So we're the only two to really miss the fairway wildly and not in very good shape. I don't know what possessed me, but I hit my best maybe approach of my life out of that bunker, big high cut with a little wind help, 5-iron. I don't know if it was a 200-yard shot or whatever it was. It was a balata ball, I know that. And to about 15 feet, 2-putted for par. And I think there were 3 bogeys. And Joe Merib in the left rough was one of those bogeys. So I advanced. So the sectionals that year were at Champions in Houston, which I thought was going to be great. I went down there. Jay went down as my caddy. And Jay in his mind is already fast forwarded to Winged Foot. He thinks we're going to be there. And I didn't know that, but I found out later he had. Anyway, so I played with Blaine McAllister that day, and Blaine had 31 pars and 5 birdies, never sniffed a bogey. And we're playing the back 9 of the second round. I think I shot 77 in the morning. I'm on my way to another 77. Not going to play in the U.S. Open that year. It's pretty obvious. And this par 5 on the front 9, I don't remember what number it is, but it's reachable. And I hit a really good tee ball, and Blaine hit his second shot right in the middle of the green, so he's putting for eagle. And mine, I kind of hit this little push cut spinny thing out short and right of the bunker in some hard pan, sculled that pitch shot to the back fringe. So Jay and I are walking up, and he's got the bag over his shoulder, trudging around, miserable because his golf coach and the guy that was supposed to get him a ticket to Winged Foot is playing terrible. And so we're walking, and I noticed Blaine's coin. And I said, Jay, hey, watch out. Step over that line. Now he's putting for eagle. And underneath his breath, he didn't know I heard him say it, but Jay said, I sure as heck wish we could putt for an eagle. He was so frustrated with my golf that day. And I told that story his senior year in high school, and to his surprise, he didn't realize I'd heard that. I sure wish we could putt for an eagle. So that was Southern Hills in 1984. There wasn't another major championship played at Southern Hills until 1994 when Nick Price won the PGA. Nick was number 1 in the world, playing the best golf of his life. Arnie, that was his last PGA championship. He had played his last U.S. Open at Oakmont earlier that summer. And I think Arnie shot 74, if my memory serves, in that final round, but missed the cut. The indelible memory I have from that week, though, is I was a golf collector. And so I had golf memorabilia collector, and I had a bunch of magazines. And so I took my entire high school golf team from Eben North over there. And I told them, I said, I'm going to give each one of you 2 magazines. You get both of them signed. You can keep whichever one you want to keep, and I'll take the other one. But your job today is to get all these signed. And so we had a kid on the team named Brandon Pearson, whose hero was Jack Nicklaus. And Nicklaus was in his 50s at the time, so wasn't really contending in majors too much. But he had both Jack Nicklaus magazines. And he went all day long, the entire day, trying to get Nicklaus to sign a magazine, and just would go forward, step up. And he said about 3 different times, Nicklaus signed somebody standing right next to him and then just walked on. He went from being Jack Nicklaus's biggest fan to just practically hating him that day because Brandon didn't get either of those magazines signed. He was the only kid shut out that day. All the other kids got them signed and got to keep one of them. But Brandon, sorry, Jack didn't sign for you that day. Southern Hills hosted the PGA Tour Championship in 95 and 96. I remember having my team over there and watching Tiger shoot 78. He had just found out his dad was in the hospital, maybe a heart issue or something. And I thought that was impossible for Tiger to shoot 78, but he did move forward to the U.S. Open in 2001. It was, an amazing U.S. Open, a playoff. I think I didn't get to watch much that week. I do remember, Charles Howell III, who had played for us at Oklahoma State. I think he was in his first year on the PGA Tour, made the cut there. 2007 PGA Championship. I remember talking to Bob Tway, whose son Kevin played for me at Oklahoma State, and asked him, I said, Bob, you got to play the first 2 rounds with Tiger. What was that like? And he said it was so surreal because he had played golf with him or had played against him, certainly competed against him. But he said it's so obvious to every player on tour right now that he's the best player and no one can beat him and no one's going to beat him. And Bob made the cut that week. And I think Scott Verplank, an Oklahoma State alum, actually finished in the top 10. I think he might have finished 8th that week, played good. But one shout out for a college golf coach was Illinois' Mike Small, was the low club professional. And so I know he's got his picture probably in his office, I would assume, with his low club professional award and Tiger holding the Wanamaker trophy. Mike Small, one of the truly great coaches in our profession, but also maybe the best player who's coached college golf. Mike is just a wonderful player. 2009, the U.S. Amateur came to Southern Hills, and I watched the whole week. We had 7 OSU golfers. One of them, a recent former player, which was Ricky Fowler, who didn't turn pro until after the Walker Cup, but was playing in the U.S. Amateur as a recent, he had left Oklahoma State. And Taylor Gooch, who would go on to play for me a couple of years later, was in the field as well. And then we had 5 other guys on the team that made it. So I remember that. One of the players that made it was Peter Uihlein, who was trying to find a way to get onto the Walker Cup team. And Peter got all the way to the quarterfinals, played great that week, lost in a playoff in the quarterfinals to Texas's Charlie Holland. Charlie hit his approach shot on 1 in the playoff to about an inch, and Peter was beaten in the quarterfinals. Couple of caveats. Peter hadn't made the team his freshman year until April. And so this is literally, he was number 6 man until April, and then now he's quarterfinalist, and he would go on to go 4-0-0 in that Walker Cup a month later. And I remember the 15th hole is a par 4 dogleg right to left with a huge, huge bunker at the corner. And Peter hit it in that bunker 3 straight days and pretty close to the front lip. And I remember him walking in there every day, and all 3 days he hit a 9-iron straight to the moon and hit the green all 3 days from that bunker. I would challenge anybody to take 3 balls in that bunker and hit that green from where he did it. Pretty amazing. Peter would also go on to be the U.S. Amateur champion the following year. And then the following year after that was a quarterfinalist as well. The only player, you'd have to go back to Tiger Woods to have 3 straight years of actually making it to the quarterfinals or further. Peter did that during those 3 years. So a college golf memory I have of Southern Hills that stands out. I mean, they've played the Big 12 championship in 03, 06, 2015, and 2018. University of Oklahoma won 2 of those in 06 and 2018, and Texas won in 03 and 15. But my memory is of the 03 championship. So I'm still an assistant coach to Mike Holder at the time. And we've got Hunter Mahan, who was well into a great year already. He would go on to win the Fred Haskins Award, the Ben Hogan Award, I think, in the Jack Nicklaus Award for Player of the Year. I mean, Hunter was having an amazing year. But this first round on the 36-hole day, and in those days we just played 36 on Monday, on Tuesday maybe, and 18 we had only a 54-hole tournament at the time. It's now 72. But Hunter's not playing very well in this first round. And only one coach can coach at a time. Mike Holder's walking with Hunter, and I'm in the gallery. And Hunter was 4 over par going to number 18, and not really doing very well. He's not in very good mood. He's not playing well, and he's got this approach shot, maybe an 8-iron. He's had a beautiful drive, and he didn't quite catch all of it. A little spinny, came up short, and then spun 45 or 50 yards down the hill. So now he's 4 over, getting ready probably to make another bogey. Maybe not a bogey. He might save par, but it would be something to do that. And this changed the entire golf tournament for Hunter. He took that lob wedge out and holed it. He holed that wedge for a birdie to shoot 73. And literally it lit a fire in him that I haven't seen. He shot 67 in the afternoon round, and he shot 68 the final round on Tuesday. His 208, 2 under par total, won by 13 shots over Texas's Jason Hartwick. And I look back on that and think, that was amazing. Hunter averaged 67 the final round, I believe, his 3rd year at Oklahoma State, his final round was always low, but that 208 at Southern Hills that year in the wind was quite amazing. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the team win as Texas took away the title. But anyway, that's a memory I had. This week, we're back to Southern Hills again for the 5th time. With Texas and Oklahoma now in the SEC, they'll be at Sea Island this next week. One thing I know for sure is the 2025 champion of the Big 12 Conference will have never before won at Southern Hills. You can find the results on Clipped. We play Tuesday 36 holes, Wednesday 18, and Thursday 18. And looks like we have rain in the forecast for Wednesday and Thursday, so we're prepared for that. But it's truly an honor, a privilege, and something that I cherish, being able to take a team back to Southern Hills to play. It's an amazing, amazing venue, one of the great golf courses in the world, and it's a place that I have some very, very special memories. Thank you for allowing me today on the Better Than I Found It podcast to kind of go through just memories that I've had of the times I've been there. I counted coaching, spectating, playing, competing, all the rounds ever been at Southern Hills, right at 150 rounds I've been around Southern Hills. So special place for me, hopefully a really special week for the Baylor Bears. Thanks and have a good day.